Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. I'm Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the Fast Friday edition of the show for May 27th, 2022. And if you're like me at all, you've heard plenty lately about how government is going to come in and protect us from a bunch of bad, evil people. Now, this is always happening. So on this episode, I've got some warnings from leading founders and old revolutionaries about this type of thing. And I think the best way to describe it for me is to point out that the power to protect you, especially when we're talking about government, is also the power to control you. And the more power you give them, the more likely they're going to use that power as a tool of control and tyranny. And then at the end, I want to also wrap it up with a different type of a mindset, also from the founders and old revolutionaries. Rather than always begging government to protect us and save us, maybe there's a different way that we can start thinking about things. But first of all, I want to say a quick thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it, whether this is your first episode or you've been here for every single one since day one. I can't thank you enough. But since it's Fast Friday, I promise to not take up too much of your time. Let's see if I can get this out to you in the next 10 to 15 minutes. And before I start out, I should mention that if you want to read along or read in context any of the original source documents, the founders' quotes, stuff like that I'm going to be mentioning in this show, you need to follow us over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. It's all spelled out there. You're going to find all the archives of the show. On individual episodes, there's a blog post for every single episode, and in those blog posts, there's a section you just have to scroll down. I get a lot of emails asking, where do you have this link? Well, just scroll down a little bit. There's a show links section, and almost all of the stuff that I mention is always linked in each episode. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. And let's start out with one that I know that we've all seen probably a zillion times. It's Benjamin Franklin. And usually it's out of context, and I'm not going to get into the context of it on this episode, but it really, the words themselves say so much. And I'm pretty confident this is actually the original version of it. This is in a reply to the governor, November 11th, 1755. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. And I've got another one from Franklin at the end wrapping this up that I think is also pretty good as well. So what we're talking about here is the fact that people will so often be afraid of something, whether it's lack of health care or the terrorists or evil bad guys or whatever it may be. And in all these situations, they go to government. They say, protect me, save me, help me. And every time you do that, if you give up a little liberty just to get that little safety, well, you're probably going to lose both. And in Franklin's words, you deserve neither. But when it comes to fear, John Adams and so many others warned us about how this helps establish government power. He said in 1776 in Thoughts on Government, this is April of 76, fear is the foundation of most governments. And if you've heard me talk about this, I've said it over and over again, I would just remove the word most, because as long as people are afraid, they will gladly relinquish their liberty. They always say it's just going to be temporary, it's going to be short term, but once that emergency is over, that excuse for them to exercise that additional power that they're not going to use against you, well, magically, it just stays with the government. And even if they don't use it right away, it's still on the books and they'll use it again later and someone will expand the reasons for it and it just gets worse and worse and worse. So fear is the foundation of government power. Here's John Dickinson in his 9th of his letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania in 1767 against the hated Townshend Acts. These were the most widely read documents on American liberty up until publication of Thomas Paine's Common Sense in 1776. It earned him the title the penman of the Revolution. And here's how Dickinson put it. He said, if money be raised upon us by others without our consent for our defense, and he put defense in the original in scare quotes. So he's acknowledging here that when they take money from you, they raise money from you, and they're claiming to be defending you, that doesn't always actually happen. And maybe he's being diplomatic. Dickinson was known to be very middle of the road as far as temperament. And for him to actually put it like this says a great deal to me. He said, those who are the judges in levying it must also be the judges in applying it. So the people who are taking the money are going to tell you what they're using it for. That's a really bad recipe. He said, of consequence, the money said to be taken from us for our defense may be employed to our injury. And a couple of decades later, during the ratification debates, Oh, I think I just closed my quote. Here it is from Brutus in his fourth anti-federalist paper. He was writing November of 1787, very similar to what Dickinson said, but we'll say a little bit more aggressive in his version of it. Power lodged in the hands of rulers to be used at discretion is almost always exercised to the oppression of the people. And maybe we can remove the words almost always, and it always is in the long run, because someone will find a way to use power to be used at their discretion in a bad way. Because whatever power you give government to do something you like will eventually also be in the hands of people who want to use that power in ways you absolutely oppose. You never wanted them to use in the first place. That's Brutus in his fourth anti-federalist paper, November of 1787. Here's Noah Webster, October of 1787. Now, we have to recognize that the founders, all of them across the spectrum, even if it wasn't to the same degree, all recognize that one of the greatest threats, if not the greatest threat to liberty for many of them, was a large permanent standing army. They lived through and witnessed the experience of the massacre in Boston, the occupation before and after, the standing armies that were left by the British in the years leading to it, the taxes that came along with it. That's why Madison at one point said, war is the greatest threat to public liberty. For him, war gave us armies, and armies gave you debts and taxes. And for Madison, armies and debts and taxes are the known instruments for putting the many under the domination of the few. But here's Noah Webster pointing out that before a standing army can rule, this is him writing in October of 1787, the people must be disarmed. So people have to be... They have to take them away first before the standing army can fully rule. Here's Fisher Ames. Although it was a different context, I think it's very similar, because whether they're taking property in whatever tool you're using for self-defense or some other property, if they can just take it away at their discretion again, whether it's for your safety or for some other reason, then you really have no liberty. And here's how Fisher Ames put it. Massachusetts ratifying convention in January of 1788, he said, "To liberty, how can I be said to enjoy that which another may take from me when he pleases?" So you have no liberty if they can just take your stuff. James Madison writing to Thomas Jefferson in May of 1798 during the ramp up to the signing of the hated Alien and Sedition Acts, which of course led to Jefferson and Madison respectively writing the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions of 1798, calling for the states to nullify and interpose against unconstitutional federal acts as soon as they happen. Here's Madison noting that perhaps it is a universal truth that the loss of liberty at home is to be charged to provisions against danger, real or pretended, from abroad. So Madison was just a tinfoil hat wearing guy, right? He was a conspiracy theorist. He recognized, or he was pointing out, that it was a universal truth, possibly, that government would be happy, or maybe the people through their fear would be happy to relinquish their liberty, and government would be happy to manufacture a crisis to generate the fear so that people will give up their liberty for that little safety, and then in the long run really deserve neither. Here's John Taylor of Caroline, one of the second crop, I guess we could put that of Jeffersonians in 1822, writing Tyranny Unmasked. And he's talking about how, national defense is kind of a ripoff in most situations, because if you have to have these large permanent standing armies, these large military setups in order to protect you from foreign danger, that requires a lot of taxation. It requires a lot of spending. And if you have to spend tons of money on this stuff, then are you really free in the first place? Taylor puts it much better than I do. He said the pretext of defending nations by oppressive taxation defeats its object by its means. So for your safety is building the large military empire. For destroying your liberty is to control you, is taking your money. That's really what it gets down to. The pretext of defending nations by oppressive taxation defeats its object by its means. And here's St. George Tucker, which I cite very often, his view of the Constitution of the United States, similar to what Noah Webster was talking about in 1787. This was published in 1803, talking about the relationship of the right to keep and bear arms and the danger of large permanent standing armies, or any standing army for Tucker. He put it this way: wherever standing armies are kept up, and when the right of the people to keep and bear arms is under any color or pretext whatsoever prohibited, liberty, if not already annihilated, is on the brink of destruction. And I think that should tell us so much. This was the view of the founding generation to a great degree. There wasn't much dissension from this. And just that, compared to what we have today, the people who support one side or the other, there's very few that are in support of the right to keep and bear arms and opposed to large permanent standing armies or to standing armies in general. It's usually one or the other. And that tells us how far we've drifted from these founding principles. So I think rather than living in fear, rather than begging government to always come in and protect us and save us, and then doing so through oppressive taxation and destroying the whole purpose of it all in the first place, maybe we need a different mentality, a different approach. And for that, I go to Thomas Paine, who I think had this one down better than anyone. Here he is in The Crisis, or The American Crisis, number 4, September of 1777. And he put it this way: those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men, undergo the fatigues of supporting it. Let's do that one more time. Those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men, undergo the fatigues of supporting it. That is timeless stuff to me. Or John Hancock had a similar mentality, writing just weeks before the Stamp Act was going to go into effect in late 1765 to his London agent, Jonathan Bernard. He put it this way: the people of this country will never be made slaves of by a submission to the damned act. No, this is so different in mentality between Paine and Hancock than what we have today. Today, people generally say, well, we're going to get the government to fix the government. We're going to get new people in there. We're going to get the courts, one part of the government, to stop the other part of the government. And there's very little of this mentality between Paine, Hancock, and so many others. And I want to wrap it up with Benjamin Franklin, because we started out with him and he's got so many great ones. This is in a letter to Jane Meacom. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. In November of 1773, he said, "Make yourselves sheep and the wolves will eat you." We've been making ourselves sheep for generations, and the wolves have been absolutely feasting. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it was interesting. I hope it was educational. I hope it made you think. It was provocative. I hope you learned something. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. If you support the show, you like the work that we do at TAC, 10th Amendment Center, just in case you didn't know that, even though you're watching the show. If you like the work that we're doing, you can put your financial faith behind us and help us reach and teach more people about the Constitution and liberty and how to defend both for as little as $2 a month. Again, that's 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. And whether or not you're able to contribute financially, that's cool. I really appreciate you being here. You can help us spread the word by leaving reviews on Apple Podcasts, smashing the like button, comments. All that stuff will help trigger the algorithms of those mainstream platforms and tell them to show us to more people. I appreciate the help. And I also appreciate you spending some time with me today. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week here on the path to liberty.